What George Strait did for his sick friend moved the whole world and brought tears even to the toughest people. The spotlight flickered weakly above the small stage at Murphy's Tavern in Nashville, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor where dreams came to die. Billy Dawson adjusted his guitar strap for the third time, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he stepped up to the microphone. At 42 years old, he had performed on this same stage countless times. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like an ending he wasn't ready to face. The crowd was sparse, maybe 30 people scattered across mismatched tables, their attention divided between watered-down drinks and conversations that mattered more than the music. Billy cleared his throat, the sound catching slightly, and began his opening number. His voice, once compared to a young Garth Brooks by a talent scout who had long since forgotten his name, now carried the weight of broken promises and unpaid bills. "Good evening, Nashville," Billy said into the microphone, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Billy Dawson, and I'm here to sing you some stories tonight." The familiar words felt hollow, like an actor reciting lines from a play he no longer believed in. He launched into his first song, a cover of Amarillo Morning that had always been a crowd favorite, but even as the melody flowed from his lips, he could feel something wrong deep in his chest. The pain had been building for weeks now, a persistent ache that no amount of cough drops or whiskey could soothe. Billy had been ignoring it, pushing through each performance with the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. But tonight, as he reached for the high notes in the chorus, his voice cracked and gave way to a violent coughing fit that doubled him over. He turned away from the microphone, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket, and when he looked down at the white fabric, his blood ran cold. Dark red stains spread across the cotton like spilled wine on a tablecloth. Billy's heart hammered against his ribs as he quickly stuffed the handkerchief back into his pocket, praying that no one in the audience had noticed. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more incredible tales of hope and redemption, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world, and your support means everything to us. Now, let's continue with Billy's story. "Sorry about that. Folks," Billy said, his voice hoarse as he returned to the microphone, "something caught in my throat there." A few people looked up from their conversations, mild concern flickering across their faces before they returned to their drinks. Billy pressed on, launching into his next song, but each note felt like sandpaper against his throat. In the back corner of the tavern, shrouded in shadows and wearing a simple black cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes, sat a man who had been watching Billy's performance with growing concern. George Strait had slipped into Murphy's Tavern unnoticed, seeking the kind of authentic music that had first inspired him to pick up a guitar. He came to places like this when he needed to remember why he had fallen in love with country music. In the first place, George had recognized Billy immediately, remembering the young musician who had opened for him during a tour in Oklahoma 7 years ago. Back then, Billy had been full of fire and ambition, his voice strong and his stage presence commanding. The man on stage tonight was a shadow of that performer, and George could see the struggle written across every line of Billy's face. As Billy moved through his set, George noticed other things that troubled him. The way Billy's clothes hung, loose on his frame, as if he had lost considerable weight. The slight tremor in his hands when he adjusted his guitar between songs. The way he kept glancing at the clock on the wall, as if he were running out of time in more ways than one. The audience remained largely indifferent, their conversations continuing over Billy's music like he was nothing more than background noise. George watched as Billy's shoulders sagged slightly with each song that failed to capture their attention. He remembered that feeling from his own early days, the crushing weight of indifference that could break a performer's spirit faster. than any harsh criticism. Billy was midway through a heartfelt rendition of "He Stopped Loving Her Today" when another coughing fit seized him, this one more violent than the first. He stumbled back from the microphone, his face contorting with pain as he fought to control, the spasms racking his chest. The handkerchief came out again, and this time George could see the red stains from across the room. "Maybe we should call it a night," someone called out from the audience, irritation clear in their voice. A few people were already gathering their things, ready to leave rather than watch a man struggle through what was clearly more than a simple cold. Billy straightened up, his face pale but determined. No, I'm fine," he insisted, though his voice was barely above a whisper. "Just give me a second here." He took a sip of water from the glass on his amplifier, his hands shaking as he raised it to his lips. George felt something twist in his chest as he watched Billy's desperate attempt to continue. It reminded him of his own father, who had worked himself to the bone on their family ranch, never complaining, even when his body was failing him. There was dignity in Billy's struggle, a refusal to give up that George both admired and worried about. The next song was one of Billy's originals, a ballad about a father's love for his daughter. As he sang, his voice found strength from somewhere, deep inside, and for a moment the pain seemed to fade. The lyrics spoke of promises to keep and dreams to fulfill, of a man who would fight any battle to protect what mattered most to him. "She's got her daddy's eyes and her mama's smile," Billy sang, his voice cracking with emotion rather than illness. "And I'd walk through fire just to see her laugh a while." The song painted a picture of a single father doing everything in his power to provide for his child, working multiple jobs and chasing an impossible dream because giving up wasn't an option. George found himself leaning forward, drawn into the raw honesty of Billy's performance. This wasn't just a song, it was a confession, a prayer, a battle cry from a man who had nothing left to lose. The audience seemed to sense it too, their conversations gradually dying down as Billy's voice filled the room with desperate hope. As the song reached its climax, Billy's voice soared one final time before being cut short by another coughing fit, this one so severe that he couldn't hide. The blood that came up with it. The handkerchief was soaked now, and Billy's face had gone ashen. He gripped the microphone stand to keep from falling, his knuckles white with the effort. "I'm sorry," Billy whispered into the microphone, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." He began to pack up his guitar with shaking hands, his movements slow and deliberate, as if each action required tremendous effort. The audience dispersed quickly, uncomfortable with the raw display of human frailty they had just witnessed. Tables emptied as people fled back to their lives, leaving Billy alone on the stage with his illness and his guitar case. George remained, in his corner, watching as Billy sat down heavily on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands. It was then that George noticed the pill bottle Billy pulled from his pocket, the way he shook out 2 tablets and swallowed them dry, his face twisted with pain. The man who had once commanded stages across the country was now struggling to get through a single set at a neighborhood bar. And George could see that this wasn't just about a career in decline. This was about a man fighting for his life. And George Strait knew he couldn't just walk away. The last customer had left Murphy's Tavern 20 minutes ago, but Billy Dawson still sat on the edge of the stage, staring at his guitar case as if it held the answers to questions he was afraid to ask. The bartender was wiping down glasses, with mechanical precision, occasionally glancing at Billy with the kind of pity that made grown men feel smaller than they already were. Billy's chest burned with each breath, and the metallic taste in his mouth had become as familiar as his morning coffee. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small prescription bottle, the label worn from constant handling. The pills rattled as he shook out 2 more tablets, his 3rd dose of the evening. They weren't helping much anymore, but they were all he could afford. "Rough night," came a voice from behind him, low and gentle, with the unmistakable drawl of East Texas. Billy turned around, expecting to see the bartender or maybe someone from the kitchen staff. Instead, he found himself looking at a man in his early 70s, wearing a simple black cowboy hat and a concerned expression that seemed genuine. The dim lighting made it hard to make out his features clearly, but there was something familiar about the way he carried himself. "Yeah, well, they can't all be winners," Billy replied, his voice still hoarse from the coughing fits. He started to stand up, then thought better of it as another wave of dizziness washed over him. "Sorry if I kept you from enjoying your evening. I know I wasn't exactly at my best tonight." The stranger moved closer, and as he stepped into the light, Billy's heart nearly stopped. The weathered face, the kind eyes, the unmistakable presence that had commanded stages across the world for decades. This wasn't just any customer who had stayed late. "Mr. Strait," Billy whispered, his voice barely audible. "George Strait?" George nodded, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from Billy. "Just George is fine, son. And you're Billy Dawson. I remember you from that show in Tulsa. Must have been 6 or 7 years ago now. You opened for me at the Brady Theater." Billy's eyes widened. He had dreamed of this moment countless times, imagining what he would say if he ever got another chance to speak with his idol. But now, sitting here in a nearly empty bar, coughing up blood and struggling to breathe, all his prepared words seemed to evaporate. "I can't believe you remember that," Billy said, shaking his head in disbelief. "That was one of the best nights of my life. I thought for sure that was going to be my big break, you know. I had some label executives there, and they seemed interested, but..." He trailed off, the familiar sting of rejection still fresh after all these years. "But nothing happened," George finished gently. "I've seen it before, Billy. This business has a way of chewing people up and spitting them out, even the talented ones. Especially the talented ones sometimes." Billy laughed bitterly, the sound turning into another coughing fit. He grabbed for his handkerchief, but George was faster, pulling a clean one from his own pocket and handing it over. When Billy pulled it away from his mouth, both men could see the fresh blood staining the white fabric. "Son, that's not just a cold," George said, his voice heavy with concern. "How long has this been going on?" Billy's defenses crumbled under the weight of George's genuine care. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the relief of finally having someone who seemed to actually see him, but the words came pouring out like water through a broken dam. 3 months, Billy admitted, his voice breaking. "Started as just a cough, you know. Thought it was from all the smoky bars and late nights, but it kept getting worse. And then I started losing weight, and the pain." He pressed his hand to his chest, where the burning sensation had become a constant companion. "Have you seen a doctor?" George asked, though he could already guess the answer from the way Billy's shoulders sagged. "Couldn't afford it at first," Billy said, staring down at his hands. "When I finally scraped together enough money for a clinic visit, they did some tests. Chest x-rays, blood work, the whole thing. Doctor said the word I'd been trying not to think about." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. George had lost too many friends over the years to know that some words didn't need to be said aloud to be understood. "Lung cancer," Billy finally whispered. "Stage 3, they said. Aggressive type. There's a treatment, some kind of new therapy that's showing promise, but my insurance..." He laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "What insurance, right? I'm a 42-year-old musician who plays dive bars. I might as well be uninsurable." George felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen this before, the way the healthcare system failed people who needed it most. But hearing it from Billy, seeing the defeat in his eyes, made it personal in a way that cut deep. "What did they say about the treatment?" George asked quietly. Billy pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his wallet, the edges worn from being folded and unfolded countless times. There's a clinic in Houston, specializes in this kind of thing. They've got this new immunotherapy protocol that's had good results, but it's experimental. Insurance won't cover it, and the cost. He shook his head. $700,000. Might as well be $7 million. And without it? 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. Billy's voice was steady now, as if he had made peace with the verdict. I've been trying to play as much as I can, save up whatever I can for my daughter. Sarah's 17, just got accepted to college. She's smart, smarter than her old man ever was. I want to make sure she has something left when I'm gone. George's chest tightened at the mention of Billy's daughter. The pain of losing Jennifer came flooding back, as fresh as if it had happened yesterday instead of decades ago. The idea of a young woman losing her father when she was just starting her life felt like a cruel repetition of his own family's tragedy. "Tell me about Sarah," George said softly. Billy's face transformed, the pain and exhaustion momentarily replaced by pure love. "She's everything good I ever did in this world. Her mom died when she was 10, car accident, and it's been just the 2 of us since then. She's got her mama's brains and her daddy's stubborn streak, which is probably why she still believes I'm going to make it as a musician someday." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos with the practiced ease of a proud father. "She's class valedictorian, wants to study journalism, says she's going to write about music, cover the stories that matter. I think she gets that from watching me struggle all these years, seeing how hard it is for artists who don't have connections or money." George studied the photos Billy showed him, seeing a beautiful young woman with dark hair and bright eyes that sparkled with intelligence and determination. She looked like she could conquer the world, and George could see why Billy was fighting so hard to stay alive for her. "Does she know?" George asked gently. "About the cancer?" "No." Billy's voice was firm. "And I don't want her to. She's got enough to worry about with college applications and her senior year. I don't want her spending her last months of high school watching me die. But if the treatment could help." "With what money, George?" Billy's voice cracked with frustration. "I've sold everything I own. My truck, my good guitars, my mama's jewelry. I'm 3 months behind on rent, and the landlord's been more than patient. I've got maybe $2,000 to my name, and that's supposed to last until—" He gestured helplessly. George was quiet for a long moment, processing everything Billy had told him. The man sitting across from him wasn't just a struggling musician. He was a father fighting against impossible odds, trying to provide for his daughter while facing his own mortality. It was a story that hit too close to home, awakening protective instincts George hadn't felt in years. "What about other family? Friends who could help?" Billy shook his head. "My parents died years ago, and I don't have any siblings. As for friends," he gestured around the empty bar. "You see how many people stuck around after the show tonight? This business isn't exactly known for its loyalty when you're down." "And the music? Are you going to keep playing?" "As long as I can," Billy said with quiet determination. "It's all I know how to do, and it's the only way I can make any money. Besides, music is what keeps me going. When I'm up there singing for a few minutes, I can forget about everything else. I can pretend I'm still the man I used to be, the one who had dreams and believed they might come true." George understood that feeling completely. Music had been his salvation through his own darkest times, the constant that kept him anchored, when everything else felt like it was falling apart. The idea of Billy losing that outlet, of being silenced by illness and financial desperation, felt like a tragedy beyond words. "That song you sang tonight," George said. "The one about your daughter, did you write that?" "Yeah, wrote it last month. It's called Daddy's Eyes. I've been working on an album, actually. Stupid, right? A dying man making an album nobody will ever hear." Billy laughed softly. But I keep thinking that maybe, if I could just get it finished, it might be something Sarah could have, something to remember me by." "It's not stupid," George said firmly. "Music is how we tell our stories, how we leave pieces of ourselves behind. Some of the best songs ever written came from the darkest places." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of Billy's situation settling between them. The bartender had finished cleaning up and was clearly waiting for them to leave, but neither man seemed ready to end this conversation. "Billy," George said finally, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. If money wasn't an issue, if you could get that treatment, would you fight this thing with everything you have?" Billy's response was immediate and fierce. "For Sarah, I'd fight the devil himself." George nodded slowly, something resolving in his expression. "Then maybe it's time you had someone in your corner who knows how to fight." Billy stared at George for a long moment, trying to process what he had just heard. The words hung in the air between them like a promise that seemed too good to be true. After years of fighting alone, the idea that someone might actually be willing to help felt almost impossible to believe. "I appreciate the sentiment, George, I really do," Billy said carefully, "but I can't accept charity. I've got my pride, and I've got to be able to look my daughter in the eye knowing I didn't give up on myself." George smiled, the expression warm and understanding. "Son, accepting help when you need it isn't giving up. It's being smart enough to know when you can't do something alone. Besides, this isn't charity. This is one musician helping another, and in this business that's just good sense." Before Billy could respond, George stood up and extended his hand. "Come on, let me drive you home. You look like you shouldn't be behind the wheel right now." Billy wanted to protest, but another wave of dizziness made him reconsider. He had taken the bus to the bar tonight because he could barely afford gas, and the thought of trying to navigate Nashville's streets in his condition wasn't appealing. He accepted George's hand and let himself be helped to his feet. The ride to Billy's apartment was quiet, both men lost in their own thoughts. George drove a simple pickup truck, nothing flashy or expensive, just a working man's vehicle that could have belonged to anyone. Billy found himself stealing glances at the country music legend, still unable to believe this was really happening. "This is it," Billy said, as they pulled up to a run-down apartment complex on the outskirts of town. The building had seen better days, with peeling paint and broken security lights, but it was what Billy could afford. "Thank you for the ride, George, and for listening. It means more than you know." "Billy," George said as Billy started to get out of the truck, "I want you to promise me something. If you hear from that clinic in Houston, if they call you about the treatment, you don't make any decisions without talking to me first. Can you do that?" Billy nodded, though he couldn't imagine why the clinic would call him. They had made it clear that without insurance or upfront payment, there was nothing they could do. But George's request seemed important to him, so Billy agreed. "I promise," he said. "But George, I don't want you to feel like you have to do anything. You've already done more than enough just by caring." George watched Billy walk slowly toward his apartment building, noting the way he had to stop twice to catch his breath. The man was sicker than he was letting on, and George knew that time was running out. As soon as Billy disappeared inside, George pulled out his phone and began making calls. The first call was to his longtime friend and business manager, Tom Rodriguez. Tom had been with George for over 20 years, handling everything from tour bookings to charitable donations, and he was used to getting calls at unusual hours. "Tom, it's George. I need you to do something for me, and I need it done quietly." "Of course, boss. What do you need?" "There's a clinic in Houston, specializes in cancer treatment. I need you to set up a payment for a patient named Billy Dawson. The full treatment package, whatever it costs." Tom was quiet for a moment. George had made anonymous donations before, but something in his voice suggested this was different. "How much are we talking about?" Around 700,000, according to the patient. And Tom, this has to be completely anonymous. The clinic can't know it's from me, and neither can Billy. Set it up through one of our shell companies, make it look like some kind of medical grant or research funding. I'll take care of it first thing in the morning, Tom promised. Anything else? Yeah, I need you to look into this Billy Dawson. Find out everything you can about his background, his music, his situation. And Tom, this conversation never happened. George's second call was to Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the head of oncology at the Houston Clinic. He had met her at a charity event 2 years ago, and she had impressed him with her dedication to treating patients regardless of their ability to pay. Dr. Hernandez, this is George Strait. I hope I'm not calling too late. Mr. Strait, what a surprise. It's never too late for a call from you. What can I do for you? I need to ask you about a patient inquiry you received. Billy Dawson, lung cancer, stage 3. I understand you have a treatment that could help him. I remember the case. Yes, a new immunotherapy protocol has shown remarkable results for his type of cancer. Unfortunately, Mr. Dawson's insurance situation makes treatment impossible. We've tried to work with him on payment plans, but the numbers just don't add up. What if I told you that funding had become available? Anonymously, of course. Could you start his treatment immediately? Dr. Hernandez was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Mr. Strait, if you're asking what I think you're asking, yes. We could begin treatment within days. The success rate for this particular therapy is over 80% when caught at his stage. Then consider it done. My business manager will be in touch with the financial details tomorrow. Just promise me that Billy will never know where the money came from. You have my word, and Mr. Strait, you're saving a man's life. George's third call was the most difficult. He dialed information and asked for the number of Sarah Dawson, Billy's daughter. It took some convincing, but eventually he was connected to a sleepy teenage voice. Hello? Sarah, my name is George Strait. I'm a friend of your father's, and I need to speak with you about something very important. There was a long pause. George Strait, like the country singer. Are you serious? Right now? I'm completely serious, sweetheart. Your father doesn't know I'm calling you, and I need you to promise me you won't tell him about this conversation unless I say it's okay. Is my dad in trouble? Is he hurt? George's heart ached at the fear in her voice. Your father is sick, Sarah. Sicker than he's been letting on, but there's hope and there are people who want to help him. I need you to be strong for him right now. Can you do that? How sick? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He has lung cancer, but there's a treatment that can help him. He's going to get a call from a clinic in Houston tomorrow, and when he does, I need you to convince him to take their offer. He's going to want to refuse because he thinks he can't afford it, but the funding has been arranged. Sarah was crying now, quiet sobs that reminded George of his own daughter's tears. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he say anything? Because he loves you and he didn't want you to worry. But now I need you to help me save his life. Can you do that? Yes, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I can do that. But Mr. Strait, why are you doing this? Why do you care about us? George thought about his own daughter, about the pain of losing someone too young, about the dreams that die when we don't have the courage to fight for them. Because sometimes, Sarah, we meet people who remind us of what really matters. Your father is a good man, and good men deserve a chance to see their daughters grow up. The next morning, Billy was awakened by his phone ringing. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something made him answer anyway. Mr. Dawson, this is Dr. Hernandez from the Houston Cancer Treatment Center. I have some very good news for you. Billy sat up in bed, his heart racing. Good news? We've received notification that funding has become available for your treatment through a medical research grant. The entire cost of your immunotherapy protocol has been covered, and we can begin treatment immediately if you're willing. Billy's hands were shaking as he held the phone. I don't understand. What kind of grant? It's from a private foundation that sponsors experimental treatments for qualifying patients. You meet all the criteria, and they've specifically allocated funds for your case. Mr. Dawson, this is your chance. But I haven't applied for any grants. I don't understand how this is possible. Sometimes these things happen, Mr. Dawson. What matters is that you have an opportunity to fight this disease. Will you take it? Billy thought about Sarah, about the songs he still wanted to write, about the life he wasn't ready to leave behind. Yes, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'll take it. Excellent. I'll have my staff coordinate your travel and accommodation. We can have you here by Friday to begin treatment. After hanging up, Billy sat in stunned silence. $700,000 just like that. It felt like a miracle, but miracles didn't happen to people like him. There had to be a catch, some kind of mistake. His phone rang again, and this time the caller ID showed Sarah's number. Dad, are you okay? You sound weird. I'm fine, baby. Just got some unexpected news. Good news, actually. What kind of good news? Billy told her about the call from the clinic, about the mysterious grant that had appeared out of nowhere. Sarah listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Dad, you have to take it. You have to go to Houston and fight this thing. I don't know, Sarah. It feels too good to be true. What if it's some kind of scam? Then we'll figure it out together. But Dad, what if it's real? What if this is your chance to get better? Billy could hear the hope in his daughter's voice, and he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had been given a second chance. Okay, baby. I'll go to Houston. I'll fight this thing. Good, Sarah said, and Billy could hear her smiling through the phone, because I'm not ready to lose you yet. That evening, Billy called George to tell him about the miraculous phone call. George listened with appropriate surprise, asking all the right questions and offering to help with anything Billy might need. It's incredible, George. I can't believe this is really happening. Sometimes the universe has a way of looking out for the people who deserve it, George said carefully. Are you ready to fight this thing? I'm ready, Billy said, with more conviction than he had felt in months. For the first time in a long time, I actually believe I might have a chance. George smiled, knowing that the real fight was just beginning, but also knowing that Billy would have every advantage that money and medical science could provide. Then let's get you to Houston and get you healthy. The world needs to hear your music, Billy, all of it. 3 weeks into his treatment at the Houston Cancer Treatment Center, Billy Dawson was beginning to feel something he had almost forgotten. Existed. Hope. The immunotherapy sessions were grueling, leaving him exhausted and nauseous, but Dr. Hernandez had been encouraged by his initial response to the treatment. More importantly, the violent coughing fits had decreased, and he hadn't seen blood in his handkerchief for 5 days. Sarah had insisted on taking a leave of absence from her senior year to be with him during treatment, a decision that had sparked their first real argument in years. Billy wanted her to stay in school, to focus on her college applications and her future, but Sarah had been adamant. Dad, I've already talked to my guidance counselor, she had said with the kind of determination that reminded Billy of her mother. I can make up the work, and my college applications are already submitted. You're more important than any of that right now. So here they were, staying in a modest hotel near the medical center, funded by the same mysterious grant that was covering Billy's treatment. Sarah spent her days in the hospital waiting room, doing homework on her laptop and getting to know the other families who were fighting similar battles. Billy had never been more proud of his daughter, or more grateful. for her presence. On this particular Thursday morning, Billy was feeling well enough to walk to the hospital cafeteria for breakfast instead of having it brought to his room. As he rounded the corner near the elevator bank, he nearly collided with a familiar figure in a cowboy hat. "George!" Billy exclaimed, genuinely surprised. "What are you doing here?" George looked momentarily startled, as if he hadn't expected to run into Billy. "Oh, hey there, Billy. I had some business in Houston and I thought I'd stop by to see how you were doing. Hope you don't mind." "Mind? Are you kidding me? I'm thrilled to see you." Billy gestured toward the cafeteria. "Join me for breakfast? I've got to warn you, the food here isn't exactly 5-star, but it's edible." As they sat down with their trays, George studied Billy's appearance carefully. The musician looked tired, but there was color in his cheeks that hadn't been there at Murphy's Tavern. His eyes were brighter, and he moved with more energy than George had seen in their previous encounter. "You look good, Billy. Better than when I saw you last." "I feel better. Not great, mind you, but better. The doctors say the treatment is working. My tumor markers are down, and the scans show some shrinkage." Billy's voice carried a cautious optimism. "I'm trying not to get too excited, but for the first time in months, I actually think I might beat this thing." "That's wonderful news. And Sarah, how is she handling all this?" Billy's expression softened. "She's been incredible. Stronger than I ever imagined she could be. She's here with me, taking care of everything, making sure I follow the doctor's orders. I don't know what I would do without her. She sounds like a remarkable young woman, must take after her father." "She takes after her mother, thank God. Rebecca was the strong one in our family. Sarah got her intelligence, her compassion, her ability to see the good in people, even when they can't see it in themselves." George nodded, understanding the weight of loss that colored Billy's words. "Tell me about the treatment. What's it like?" Billy described the daily routine of the immunotherapy, the way the medicine was designed to boost his immune system to fight the cancer cells. He talked about the side effects, the exhaustion, the nausea, but also about the small victories, the days when he felt strong enough to walk around the hospital grounds or even play his guitar in the patient lounge. "The strangest part," Billy continued, "is that I've started writing again. Really writing, not just covers or simple songs. Being this close to losing everything has somehow freed me up creatively. I've written 6 new songs since I've been here." "That's fantastic, Billy. Music has always been healing for the performer and the audience." "I keep thinking about what you said that night at Murphy's, about music being how we tell our stories. I want to finish that album I mentioned, the one for Sarah. Win or lose, I want to leave her something that shows her who her father really was, not just the struggling musician, but the man who loved her more than life itself." George felt a familiar tightness in his chest, remembering his own desires to leave something meaningful for Jennifer. "That's a beautiful gift, Billy. What kind of songs are you writing?" "All kinds. Some about the fight, about not giving up even when the odds are against you. Some about Sarah, about watching her grow up and become this amazing person. And some about gratitude, about the unexpected kindness of strangers who show up when you need them most." George raised an eyebrow. "Unexpected kindness? Like you, George. Like whoever set up that grant that's paying for all this." "I've been trying to find out more about it, but the foundation is very secretive. All I know is that someone, somewhere, decided my life was worth saving, and I can't even thank them properly." "Maybe that's the point," George suggested gently. "Maybe the gift is more meaningful when it doesn't come with expectations or obligations." Billy nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose you're right. I just wish I could do something to pay it forward, you know? This treatment, this chance at life, it's worth more than money. It's worth everything." They finished breakfast in comfortable conversation, talking about music, about Nashville, about the changes in the country music industry over the years. George found himself genuinely enjoying Billy's company, impressed by the man's resilience and his perspective on life despite his circumstances. As they prepared to leave, George seemed to hesitate, as if he wanted to say something important. "Billy, I've been thinking about something. When you're finished with treatment, when you're feeling stronger, I'd like to talk to you about a project." "What kind of project?" "Well, I'm always looking for new material, and I've been thinking about doing an album that focuses on real stories, songs that mean something. What you said about writing from this experience, about the songs you're creating, I think there might be something there we could work on together." Billy stared at George in disbelief. "You want to work with me? On your album?" "I want to hear what you've written first, of course, but Billy, you've got something to say, and you've got the talent to say it. Sometimes the best music comes from the deepest places. I don't know what to say. George, that would be a dream come true. Don't get too excited yet. Let's focus on getting you healthy first. But I wanted you to know that when you're ready, there might be opportunities waiting for you." After George left, Billy sat in the hospital garden trying to process what had just happened. Not only was he responding well to treatment, but George Strait, the king of country music, was talking about collaborating with him. It seemed too good to be true, but then again, so had the mysterious grant that was saving his life. That evening, Billy called Sarah to tell her about his encounter with George. She was in their hotel room, working on a college essay about overcoming adversity when her phone rang. "Dad, you sound excited. Good news from the doctors." "Even better, I ran into George Strait at the hospital today." "What? Are you serious? What was he doing there?" "He said he had business in Houston and wanted to check on me. But Sarah, he talked about maybe working together on a project when I'm better. He wants to hear my new songs." Sarah squealed with delight. "Dad, that's incredible. This is everything you've ever dreamed of." I'm trying not to get too excited. I mean, he was just being nice, probably. "Dad, George Strait doesn't just show up at hospitals to be nice to people. He's obviously seen something in you, something special." Billy smiled, hearing the pride in his daughter's voice. "Maybe you're right. Maybe this is all part of some bigger plan." "I think it is, Dad. I think everything that's happened, the treatment, meeting George, all of it, it's happening for a reason." That night, Billy sat in his hospital bed with his guitar, working on a new song. The melody had been in his head all day, and the words were finally coming together. It was about second chances, about the kindness of strangers, about the way life could surprise you just when you thought all hope was lost. He thought about George's unexpected visit, about the mysterious benefactor who had funded his treatment, about his daughter's unwavering faith in him. For the first time in months, Billy allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't ending. Maybe it was just beginning. Meanwhile, across town in a hotel suite, George was on the phone with his producer discussing plans for his next album. But his mind kept wandering to Billy, to the songs he was writing, to the strength he had shown in the face of impossible odds. "I think I've found something special," George told his producer, "a songwriter who's been through hell and come out the other side with something to say. I want to set up some studio time when he's ready." "Anyone I know?" "Nobody knows him yet, but they will. Trust me on this one." As George ended the call, he realized that helping Billy was changing him too. For years he had been going through the motions, making music that was technically perfect but emotionally safe. Billy's raw honesty, his willingness to write from his deepest pain, was reminding George of why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. The next morning brought more good news. Dr. Hernandez called Billy into her office with results. From his latest scans, The tumor had shrunk by 40%, and his blood work showed continued improvement. "Mr. Dawson, I have to say, your response to this treatment has been exceptional. If we continue to see progress like this, we're looking at a very positive prognosis." Billy felt tears streaming down his face. "So, I'm going to be okay? I never make promises about cancer, but I'm very optimistic. You're responding better than most patients, and your attitude has been remarkable throughout this process. When can I go home? If your next round of scans shows continued improvement, we can discuss transitioning you to outpatient treatment. You could be back in Nashville within a month." Billy called Sarah immediately, then George, sharing the good news with the two people who mattered most to him. George's reaction was everything Billy had hoped for, genuine joy and excitement about Billy's recovery. "This calls for a celebration," George said. "When you get back to Nashville, I want to take you and Sarah to dinner. And Billy, I want to hear those songs you've been working on. I have a feeling they're going to be something special." As Billy hung up the phone, he looked out the window at the Houston skyline and felt something he hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement about the future. He was going to live. He was going to see Sarah graduate from college, and he was going to make music with his hero. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. 2 months later, Billy Dawson stood backstage at the Ryman Auditorium, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his guitar strap. The legendary venue, known as the Mother Church of Country Music, was sold out for what George Strait had billed as an evening of stories and songs. Billy could hear the excited murmur of the crowd through the curtain, and he still couldn't quite believe he was here. His recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. The doctors in Houston had declared him in complete remission just 3 weeks ago, and he felt stronger than he had in years. His hair had grown back, the color had returned to his cheeks, and most importantly, his voice was back to its full power. The songs he had written during treatment had evolved into something extraordinary, raw and honest, in a way that moved everyone who heard them. "You ready for this, Billy?" George appeared beside him, looking as calm and collected as always. "As ready as I'll ever be," Billy replied, though his voice betrayed his nerves. "I still can't believe this is happening. A year ago I was playing dive bars and coughing up blood. Now I'm about to perform at the Ryman with George Strait." "Life has a way of surprising us," George said with a knowing smile. "Sometimes when we think we've reached the end, we're actually just at the beginning of something beautiful." The evening had been George's idea. He had pitched it as a benefit concert for cancer research, with Billy as the featured opening act. But Billy suspected there was more to it than that. Over the past few weeks, George had been introducing him to people in the industry, setting up meetings with producers and record executives. It felt orchestrated, deliberate, like George was building something bigger than just one night of music. Sarah was in the audience, sitting in the front row with tears already streaming down her face. She had graduated from high school a month early to be there, and her college acceptance letters were piling up at home. The future that had seemed so uncertain a year ago was now bright with possibility. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcer's voice over the sound system, "please welcome to the stage Billy Dawson." Billy walked out into the spotlight, and the applause was warm and welcoming. He had performed on big stages before, but this felt different. This audience knew his story, knew what he had been through, and they were here to celebrate not just his music, but his survival. "Good evening, Nashville," Billy said into the microphone, his voice strong and clear. "A year ago, I was playing in a little bar across town, fighting for my life and wondering if I'd ever see my daughter graduate from high school. Tonight, I'm here to tell you that miracles do happen, and they often come in the form of people who care enough to help a stranger." He launched into his first song, one he had written about the night he met George at Murphy's Tavern. The lyrics painted a picture of desperation and hope, of two men connecting over shared pain and the healing power of music. The audience listened in rapt attention, hanging on every word. As Billy moved through his set, he told the story of his journey. He spoke about the mysterious benefactor who had funded his treatment, about the doctors who had saved his life, about his daughter's unwavering faith. He sang about second chances, about the kindness of strangers, about the way life could surprise you when you least expected it. "I want to sing a song I wrote for someone very special," Billy said as he prepared for his final number. "This is for the person who paid for my treatment, who gave me my life back when I had nothing to offer in return. I don't know who you are, but I want you to know that your gift didn't just save my life. It saved my daughter's future, and it gave me the chance to do what I love most in this world." The song was called "Anonymous Angel," and it was Billy's masterpiece. The melody was haunting and beautiful, and the lyrics spoke of gratitude so profound it seemed to come from the depths of his soul. As he sang, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and even the hardened music industry professionals in the audience were visibly moved. When Billy finished, the standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. As the applause finally died down, George Strait walked onto the stage and the crowd erupted again. "Ladies and gentlemen," George said, his voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium, "I want to tell you a story about the man you just heard sing." George began to speak about that night at Murphy's Tavern, about seeing Billy's struggle and recognizing something special in him. He talked about the power of music to heal, about the responsibility we all have to help one another, about the way life can change in an instant if we're paying attention. "Billy asked me once about the mysterious benefactor who funded his treatment," George continued, his voice growing softer. "He wanted to know who cared enough about a stranger to give him a second chance at life. Well, Billy, I think it's time you knew." Billy's heart stopped. The crowd grew so quiet you could hear a pin drop. George turned to face him, and Billy saw something in his eyes that made his legs feel weak. "Billy, there was no anonymous foundation. There was no medical research grant. There was just a man who recognized talent and heart when he saw it, and who couldn't stand by and watch it die." The words hit Billy like a physical blow. His guitar nearly slipped from his hands as the reality of what George was saying sank in. "What are you saying, George?" "I'm saying that sometimes angels aren't mysterious at all. Sometimes they're just people who have been blessed with the ability to help, and who choose to use that blessing to make a difference." George's voice was thick with emotion. "I paid for your treatment, Billy. I arranged everything because I believed in you, because I saw something in you that reminded me of why I fell in love with music in the first place." Billy stared at George in shock, his mind reeling. $700,000. George Strait had spent $700,000 to save his life, and he had never said a word about it. "But why?" Billy whispered, his voice barely audible through the microphone. "Because I lost my daughter when she was just 13 years old," George said, his voice breaking slightly. "And I couldn't stand the thought of another daughter losing her father when there was something I could do to prevent it. Because music needs voices like yours, Billy. Real voices that sing about real things. And because sometimes when we help someone else, we heal a little bit of ourselves too." The crowd was on its feet again, but Billy barely heard them. He was thinking about Sarah, about all the times George had asked about her, about the way he had connected with her story. He was thinking about the phone calls, the visits to the hospital, the way George had orchestrated everything to give Billy not just his life back, but his dreams too. "I don't know what to say," Billy said, tears streaming down his face. "You don't have to say anything. George replied. "Just keep making music, keep telling your story, and maybe when you're ready, help someone else the way you've been helped." George pulled out a piece of paper from his jacket. "Billy, I have one more surprise for you. This is a recording contract with MCA Records. They want to produce your album, the one you've been working on, and they want me to produce it with you." Billy's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees on the stage. The crowd was going wild, but all he could think about was how his life had changed from that night at Murphy's Tavern. He had gone from dying alone to living his dream, and it was all because one man had cared enough to help. Sarah rushed onto the stage, throwing her arms around her father. "Dad, you did it. You actually did it." George joined them, and the three of them stood together in the spotlight, surrounded by the thunderous applause of the crowd. In that moment, Billy understood that his story wasn't just about survival. It was about the power of human kindness, about the way one person's generosity could ripple out and change the world. 6 months later, Billy's album, Second Chances, debuted at #1 on the country charts. The duet he recorded with George Strait, Angels Among Us, became the fastest-selling single in country music history. But more importantly, Billy had established a foundation to help other musicians facing medical crises, funded in part by the proceeds from his album sales. Sarah enrolled at Vanderbilt University, studying journalism with a focus on music industry. Reporting. She wrote her first article about her father's journey, and it won a national award for young journalists. But she always said that the real story wasn't about her father's illness or recovery. It was about the moment when George Strait proved that heroes still exist in the world. George continued touring and recording, but he said that working with Billy had reminded him of why he had become a musician in the first place. The authenticity and emotional depth that Billy brought to his music influenced George's own songwriting, and their collaboration became a defining moment in both of their careers. Billy never forgot the lesson he learned that night at Murphy's Tavern, that sometimes when we think we're at the end of our story, we're actually just at the beginning of a new chapter. That angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they wear cowboy hats and carry guitars. And that the greatest gift we can give someone isn't money or fame, but hope and the chance to dream again. The last song on Billy's album was called Thank You, and it was addressed to George. But it was also addressed to everyone who had ever helped a stranger, who had ever shown kindness without expecting anything in return, who had ever believed that one person could make a difference in the world. Because they can, and sometimes they do,